Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we have a ton to discuss. First off, I want to thank all the new subscribers. I really appreciate all the support. If you are not currently subscribed to this channel, I know about 75% of the people that watch these videos are not already. If you would, drop me a subscribe, follow me over on Twitter, follow me on any other podcast platform of choice, whether it be Apple or Spotify. It really does help out the show. I'm going to continue with the 2 episodes a week as long as I can. If I need to record a special episode one of these weeks because we have just too much information, I will do so. My plan is to cover, obviously, Alabama basketball news as often as it comes up, but I'm going to put a pause on that for this episode and for the next couple of episodes, and my plan is to shift over into football. I do have some episodes planned, as I've previously mentioned, with some other people. I have quite a few different people that have agreed to come on the show, so I'm probably going to be sprinkling some of those throughout here in the next coming weeks. But I want to start with the Alabama football coverage because there's a lot of official visits going on. We're going to talk a little bit about the recruits. Then we're also going to talk about the Alabama defense, and then we're going to start doing some position-by-position breakdowns as to what my thoughts are in terms of who I think might start, as well as less important about the starters and more about just what I think about a specific position group. So today we're going to talk about the defensive backs, but like I said, let's go ahead and get the show underway with some Alabama football coverage. So first things first, as I mentioned, wanted to talk a little bit about, and I by no means am somebody who covers the recruits at some crazy level. So there are plenty of other resources out there if you're looking for coverage and predictions as to who Alabama may be landing from a recruit standpoint on the football side of things. I will be covering some of these that may commit here in the coming weeks. However, we did have a ton of official visits here this last weekend. This last weekend saw, about 12 guys that visited. Some of the names that you're going to be aware of, like Jet Washington, a 5-star safety, Boobie Foster, number 5 receiver. He was previously played with Keelan Russell. You got Nolan Wilson, a top 100 defensive lineman. Sincere Johnson, top 100 linebacker. Malachi Lee, top 100 O-line. Braden Rouse, top 100 linebacker. Titan Davis, Xavier Tiller, Kevin Ford, Kenny Darby. Kenny Darby's the LSU commit. You may have seen some stuff online with him, with Derek Meadows, the current Alabama wide receiver. A lot of LSU fans were pretty upset about that one because he seemed to be getting very close with Derek Meadows, and now it sounds like he's going to have a July 4th commit or official choosing date between Alabama and LSU, even though he's currently an LSU commit. So that's one that obviously Alabama thinks we may be able to do well with. There's some others. A few others that also visited this past weekend. Again, stay abreast with everybody that really follows the recruits super in depth. I wish I followed football recruiting more closely. There's just so many players across so many different avenues, and it's really tough for me to follow it at the same level that I follow basketball recruiting. Like I said, there are some other guys that I really appreciate that do some great work over there. You've got Clint Lamb. You've got the guys on Locked on Bama. You've got obviously the Bama Online guys. There's plenty of guys out there that do really, really good coverage as it relates to specific recruiting tidbits and stuff like that. So if you are interested in that kind of coverage, I would recommend you following some of those guys, and they will let you know about the commitments. Once they get signed with Alabama, my plan is to start covering these guys a little more closely once they're actually signed. But through the whole recruitment process, I just don't have the bandwidth currently, with my day job and the other things that I follow to follow it quite as closely as it really deserves to be followed at that level. So those are some of just the recruits that we've had coming in the last weekend, I guess. We have plenty of others coming this summer. Alabama is doing a big, obviously push during summer recruiting season. That's when you see a lot of the official visits and things like that happening for the 2026 class. I would expect to see a lot of official visit photos, a ton of different stuff out of the Alabama, social graphics team. I think that the social media team has done a really, really good job. They also have some videos that they've been putting out that's specifically for each player as they come on visits. I think that the graphics and social media team and all the creatives, so to speak, behind the scenes that do all of that, I think have done a really, really good job. I'm very curious to see what all they do this upcoming season. I know last season they did the hockey jerseys thing. That's when I ended up having the hockey goalie on last season to discuss that. So I am very curious what all they do this season, because I know it has changed up a little bit, but I'm sure it will be absolutely incredible. But as I mentioned, this show, we're going to talk about a couple of things. And the first thing that I want to talk about is I want to talk about what my thoughts are going to be on the defense for this season. And this is more of the defense as a whole. This is more of how well I think the defense was in year one under Kane Wommack, some things that I would like to see done a little better, some things I think he did really, really well last season. Obviously, he had some injuries. He had... it was a new defense with a completely new scheme from what they were recruited for under Nick Saban. So it was a different, a completely different mindset. But I think that by and large, I think that his defense played pretty well. I think that year two under Kane Wommack, we're going to see a few things, right? One thing that I think that Alabama did really, really well last season is, and it's something that we talked about that we thought that Kane Wommack's defense was going to be able to do, but they forced a decent number of turnovers. Looking here at the stats, like they forced more interceptions than touchdowns through the air. Obviously, that's a great stat to see, right? When you're picking off the ball more times and they're scoring on you, that's obviously a really, really good thing. When you're looking at fumbles, it looks like we ended up getting 11 fumbles last season. That's a really, really good thing as well. I think that just in general, I think that Alabama has done a really good job at forcing turnovers. I think a lot of that has to do with the style of defense that Kane runs. I think that also has to do with the fact that we've had some safeties here last season that did a really good job, especially, and we're going to talk about some of them later in the show, but some guys like Bray Hubbard that stepped up when Keon Sabb got hurt, or you had some young guys with Xavier Brown that picked off some passes, right? You have multiple guys that I think have done a really good job at stepping into those roles. I think they're going to be able to play bigger roles this season. I expect them to play much bigger roles, obviously, with Malachi Moore gone and with some additional, time under their belt in Kane Wommack's defense. So I do think that I expect a big season upcoming. First and foremost, I think the reason why I expect a big season upcoming is when you look at what Alabama did last season. Alabama was number 10 in total scoring defense, right? We gave up on average just over 17 points a game, 17.38 points a game. That number, when you think about what Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer should be able to put together on offense, 17 points a game, you should be able to win just about every game at 17 points a game, right? Last season, the games that Alabama lost, they put up 17, right? So that one was on the offense. Because we only gave up 24 the defense gave up 24 against Tennessee. The defense gave up 24 against Oklahoma, but again, that included some pick sixes, so I really wouldn't call that on the defense. And then in the Michigan game, we gave up 19 and lost that game as well. The only game that we lost that I would truly look at was the defense's fault was the Vanderbilt game. The Vanderbilt game was absolutely on the defense. We did not have the ability to get the ball back to the offense. Now, did Jalen throw an interception that got us off schedule? Sure. But that was not the reason that we lost that Vanderbilt game. The reason we lost that Vanderbilt game is the defense could not get off the field, right? I think that something definitely changed after that game and the South Carolina game because I thought the defense played really well against Tennessee. Obviously pitched a shutout against Missouri, looked phenomenal against LSU. Looked fine against Oklahoma. Obviously wasn't the best game, but the defense looked fine. I thought that in general, the defense really came into its own after that Vanderbilt and South Carolina game. I think that the defense, they found something that was working. And I think that was a big thing that happened when you're talking about the defense. The other thing that I think gives us a lot of hope for next season is we're returning 69% of our defensive production from last season, including 8 starters from the defense, right? So when you think about some of the big starters and the way Alabama's returning, we returned 14 total guys from last season that started. 8 are on defense, 6 are on offense. We have about 10% more returning production on the defensive side of the field as compared to we do on the offense, right? Both are really good. We're top 30 in the S&P Plus for returning production. Connolly's Bill Connolly's S&P Plus has us at the number. I believe he has us at the number 5 defense in his projections for next season. That has to do with obviously your defensive stats, returning production, recruiting, and etc. So when you think about what our defense should be next season and should be able to be next season, it's going to be a really, really good unit. I think a lot of that has to do with, it's something we talked about around the NFL draft time. Alabama had some guys that, could have been probably maybe day 2, possibly day 3 guys that instead of entering their name in the NFL draft, they decided to go ahead and come back to school. You have guys like Damani Jackson, guys like Tim Keenan, LT Overton. These guys, I think all had an ability to go to the NFL draft, but, they were probably day 3 guys, maybe could play their way into day 2 guys. Instead, these guys come back for another season. You also bring in a guy like Nikai Hill-Green from Colorado that I think is going to be a really, really good starter for the linebacking core, obviously replacing Jahad Campbell. You have Deontay Lawson coming back from his injury. You have an extra year under Xavier Brown. You have your freshmen in like Dijon Lee. You have, just the guys who you're bringing in, the extra years that you're having on some of the other guys, I think is going to be really big. You're also, I think, I would say you're replacing a guy in Malachi Moore that had a big role in the defense, but you saw what happened when Keon Sabb got hurt last season and broke his foot. Bray Hubbard slid into position in the safety, in the back end, and had, he was second, or I guess tied for the team in interceptions last season, right? So, you have some guys that even though they had not played a ton coming into last season, now coming into this season, they have much more time and experience under their belt. That's the thing that I think this defense is going to give you, is it gives you the experience that last season didn't have, right? Last season had some experience, but the experience they had was definitely not under Kane Wommack's defense. And some of the experience they had when you had some of the injuries, whether it was injuries, where you had a guy like Keon Sabb coming in, obviously for, his first season, even with Alabama in general. You had a guy like Xavier Brown that was a freshman. You had, Damani Jackson coming over from USC. You have all these guys that had solid potential and you knew could be good players, but you were just unsure on exactly what they were going to look like moving forward. And I think that now you have these guys actually in the system for an entire season, and you have these guys that have played some serious minutes, even in a standpoint of a Bray Hubbard, right? He's somebody that would be slid into a starting role this year, but if Keon Sabb doesn't get hurt, he wouldn't have had the minutes he had last season. But instead, Keon Sabb gets hurt. He slides into the role that he had. He's played massive minutes. He started multiple games in SEC play. He's been a huge addition to the team. You have a guy like Deshaun Jones that, played in all 14 games last season. I believe he only had 1 start, but he played in all 14 games. So all the starters that you have playing this season, with the exception of Nikai Hill-Green, started or played significant minutes in a game last season, right? Xavier Brown is one that originally you would be like, I don't know. He didn't, I wonder how he's going to be. Xavier Brown had the pick to win the Georgia game, right? Xavier Brown had 3 interceptions last season. He was a really good player. Did he have some freshman moments, in the back end? Sure. But he was completely fine last season, right? And I think that's the benefit that you have to this team is even though you're only returning, or I guess I say only, but you're returning 8 of your starters on the defensive side. Not only are you returning 8 starters, everybody who's about to play has really played significant minutes in the team. And I think that's the big thing that you're getting for this next season for the defense. And that's why I personally have super high hopes for the defense this season. I think you're also looking at the schedule that you're going to be facing. And, there are some question marks when you're looking at, who Alabama is going to be facing from a quarterback's perspective, right? If you just look at the schedule for next season, Florida State, I don't, Castellanos, I don't know that he scares me. Wisconsin, not sure who that's even going to be. Georgia, maybe their incoming quarterback is going to be really good, but they're honestly in a similar position to Alabama that, it's kind of an unknown commodity at quarterback. Vanderbilt, it's going to be a new starting quarterback. South Carolina, I think they're obviously in a good spot with their quarterback. I am very curious on how everything goes with him, but, they're in a good position for the quarterback. Tennessee, completely new position for the starting quarterback after Nico leaves. I think that could be a good or bad thing. Obviously, we play him later in the season, so very curious to see how the, post-Nico Tennessee looks. Missouri, that one's a little bit of a question mark. LSU has obviously a solid starting quarterback. I think that they're going to be good again. But again, Alabama did fairly well against LSU last season. Obviously things can change, but I do like our chances against LSU. And then Oklahoma and Auburn, we will see how everything goes. But from a quarterback's perspective, I don't think that there's any, if there is a quarterback on the schedule that I think I'm most concerned about, it would either be South Carolina or it would be LSU, right? And South Carolina obviously gave us a scare this last season, so that's one that you definitely need to have circled. So I am very curious how that one goes. And then LSU, that one is going to be at home this season, so I think there's benefit in that. And then there's also benefit in the fact that you played him very well this last season, right? So I think those are the big things you can circle when you're talking about, what I would consider two of the better quarterbacks on our schedule this year. Those are when I'm looking at, especially a defense, is there that guy that you just have to circle, right? The Jaden Daniels when he was at LSU, or, just some of the different quarterbacks that we've had in this league. And I think for Alabama's schedule this season, you have some very good teams for sure. I mean, you're going to play a tough schedule, but you're in the SEC, you're going to play a tough schedule every year. That should not shock anyone. I think the thing that I like the most about this schedule is I don't know that there's any quarterback truly on that schedule. Lenore Sellers is probably the answer, but there's any quarterback on that schedule that truly terrifies me. And I wouldn't say Sellers terrifies me, but I think he has a chance to be a very, very good quarterback, obviously, as he continues on in that offense. But he's the one that I think, could stress our defense the most. So, I really like what I see out of that. And because those quarterbacks do not scare me a ton, when I look at the returning production we have on defense, I look at obviously how well Kane Wommack's defense finished last season. I think that he deserved the criticism that he got at the beginning of the season, but he also deserves the praise he got at the end of the season, right? Post South Carolina, his defense was a completely different animal. Pre-South Carolina, they had some problems on defense. Obviously South Florida gave us really bad issues, for a huge percentage of that game. And obviously the final score doesn't look like that, but there were major issues in that game. South Carolina had problems. Vandy obviously had huge problems. And so I think that's the question when you're looking at, what is his defense going to be in year two? I think that's what you have to look at. And because of the quarterback situation and obviously how well his defense finished out last season, I'm super hopeful for what I'm going to get out of year two in Kane Wommack's defense. So I think the place that I want to start, and like I said, we're going to kind of go position by position. And obviously we're starting with the defense because that's what we talked about a little bit first. But the first position group that I want to break down, and I want to talk about who kind of some of the projected starters are. I think most of the starters in this one is kind of solidified. I think you have a couple of guys that are going to be playing their way into potential starting roles. And there's going to be some competition, but is going to be the defensive back room. So the defensive back room, I think your guaranteed starters is Damani Jackson will be your cornerback one. Your safeties are going to be Keon Sabb and Bray Hubbard. Right? I think those are your guaranteed starters. I think game one, you start with Xavier Brown. I think that there is a world in which Dijon Lee really can play his way in. I've heard really good things out of the freshman. I think Dijon Lee is a guy that with his length and his ball skills and his ability out on the perimeter, I think that he is going to play significant snaps this season. I don't think he starts for the first couple of games, but it would not surprise me if Dijon Lee has some type of resurgence similar to Xavier Brown last season, where he comes in a significant moment and is up against a top receiver and can make a play, right? Dijon Lee is that kind of player. He's that kind of lockdown guy. And also with the length he has, he's somebody that's very unique in the defensive backfield, especially at the corner position. At 6'3", with the long arms he's got and the ability to cover that he has, I think that he is somebody that it's going to be very difficult for us to keep him off the field, right? He's going to be a guy that I would fully expect gets on the field. And I think that when you're talking about the different corner position, I think Damani Jackson is such a lockdown corner at times that Damani does, some things that we've obviously seen in Saban's defenses, but Damani locks down their main receiver. And so because of that, they're just throwing at the other side of the field. And so even if Xavier Brown starts, that position potentially is going to have to be rotated just because of, especially against some of the faster paced teams, right? Think like a Tennessee, think like even South Carolina when they get running. Some of these teams that we face and play that have higher tempo, I think that those are the ones where you might see some different guys rotated in and out. So I would fully expect Dijon Lee to play some major minutes this season, from a corner perspective. Another guy that you brought in, and I'm very curious to see what he does this season. Obviously, you bring him in the transfer portal, is Cam Calhoun. I don't think that obviously he starts. I think that he potentially is another one that you could see some major minutes. I am curious to see kind of what role he's going to play on the team. For those of you unaware, he redshirted his freshman year when he was at Michigan. Then this last season against at Utah, I guess. He played in 11 games. He had some, I believe he led their team in pass breakups. So he obviously has some good ball skills. He has some developmental potential, and I think he's somebody that Alabama obviously recruited for a reason. But, I do not think that we brought him in to be a starter. I know a lot of people, sometimes question, especially when you're talking about, for the fans of mine that cover basketball, follow me when we're covering basketball a lot of times when you're bringing in a transfer, people want that transfer to be the go-to guy, right? You're bringing in a transfer because he is the number one guy. In football, it's a lot about depth, right? Just because you're bringing in a guy, that does not mean he has to be the number one receiver. He has to be the number one corner, number one quarterback. You're really bringing in guys in some cases because you need a depth piece, right? Injuries happen in football, at a more substantial rate than basketball. Additionally, on top of that, you're talking about, development, strength and conditioning, etc. So, you have to have a guy, behind the guy, right? A lot of football isn't how good your starters are. It's how good is your 2 deep, how good is your 3 deep. And so that's what you're looking at when you're looking at a guy like Cam Calhoun. Like I said, I would not expect him to start, but I do think that he plays pretty substantial minutes at some point in this game or at some point this season. He's another guy that I think, Alabama obviously brought him in for a reason. I would expect him to play probably in most games. I don't know if he's an every game guy, but I would expect him to play obviously in most games. Again, some of the guys that follow these depth charts and stuff a little more closely would be better about that than I would. Then you're looking at guys like Drake Kirkpatrick and Deshaun Jones. I think most people are predicting Deshaun Jones probably to start at that, Husky position, that third, corner safety hybrid, so to speak, in our system. Currently, that guy most people are projecting is Deshaun Jones. Deshaun Jones, the transfer previously from Wake Forest, last season did play in all 14 games. He's somebody that I think that, again, Alabama has done a good job bringing in players that fit our skill set and fit what we need, right? I think that's the benefit of what this staff has done a really good job with, is not always just going after the flashy guys, but going after the guys that fit what you're looking for. We talked about that when Alabama got the commitment from Jackson Marco, the tight end, earlier this summer. There was a lot of comments around, why did Alabama get this tight end that nobody's ever heard of that's only caught like one pass? Well, it's because he fit the need that Alabama was looking for, and they were looking for a blocking tight end, right? He was an elite blocking tight end, and that's why Alabama brought him in. I think that's what this staff has done a really good job of, is they're not getting caught up in the you have to go after every guy from the state of Alabama, or you have to go after every guy from this certain high school because we have a pipeline built, or you have to go after, XYZ thing, right? I think they're really looking at this player fits what we're looking for. And I think that's what you're getting when you're looking at a guy like Cam Calhoun. That's what you're getting when you're looking at a guy like Deshaun Jones. Obviously, Dijon Lee was a super highly rated recruit. Everyone wanted him in the country. But it's even what you're getting when you're looking at him, right? Obviously, he's a guy that fits a position of need. Even though you have some starting corners that are really good, you can look at Dijon Lee and project him out and say, hey, this is an elite guy. This is a guy that can be a number one guy, maybe not this season, but next season. He's a guy that can play some substantial minutes upcoming in this next season. And then when Damani Jackson inevitably leaves next season, he's a senior. When he goes to the NFL draft this next season, you can slide a guy like Dijon Lee into a starting corner position, and he has already played substantial minutes this last season, right? So football is so much about making sure that you have the depth, making sure that your two deep is available to be able to play those snaps. And I think that's the spot that I think that Courtney Morgan and Kalen DeBoer and the recruiting staff has done a really good job of. And I think this cornerback room is a great example of that. I think that when you're looking at, the two deep at all of the positions, currently I'm looking at, the two deep that the Cover Crimson Locked On Bama guys have done. So their projected two deep says Keon Sabb starting safety with Zay Mincy behind him, Bray Hubbard starting free safety with Ivan Taylor, the freshman, behind him, Deshaun Jones and Dre Kirkpatrick, Xavier Lee and Cam Calhoun, and then Damani Jackson and Dijon Lee. That two deep is phenomenal, right? Zay Mincy is a guy that I think that if you look at how he's been projected out at multiple across. If he was on another team, I think he's a guy that would be playing more substantial minutes than he potentially is going to get to play behind a guy like Keon Sabb. I think obviously Alabama will find places to put him on the field, but he's a guy that I think would play, more substantial minutes in other places. A guy like Ivan Taylor, a freshman that I think is a really highly rated guy that has a chance to obviously be really, really good. I think that, again, all the guys that Alabama, has in that two deep are phenomenal players. And I think, honestly, that the defensive backfield is a place that Alabama is incredibly strong. It's a place that we had a lot of question marks coming into last season just because there were so many guys that you were kind of unsure about. The only guy you knew for sure about was Malachi Moore, obviously losing Caleb Downs. You brought in Keon Sabb. You hope that Keon Sabb was going to be able to replace Downs in a substantial way. I think that at the beginning of the season, I think Sabb did a really good job prior to the broken foot injury. But I thought that Sabb did a great job. The big thing is you're also returning the top four leaders on your team in interceptions from last season. The top four guys accounted for 10 interceptions last season. Hubbard and Brown both got 3, and Sabb and Jackson both got 2. Right, so when you're bringing, when you have those guys returning, you're returning 10 interceptions from last season, and in situations like Hubbard and Brown, the guys who led the team in interceptions, Xavier Brown obviously was a freshman last season, didn't play a ton, obviously played in some major minutes, but did not had really no experience prior to that. And Bray Hubbard, another one that did not have really any major minutes in substantial crunch time prior to that. Keon Sabb goes down and he looked incredible in the back end, right? So I think that's what gives you the most hope for this defensive backfield. I think that honestly, this defense, I can look all across the defense, and I think I'm very happy with what I see about it. I think this is a defense that absolutely can be as good as last season's team, if not better. Honestly, I would probably suspect it's going to be a little better just because you have a second season under Kane Wommack, and I think that the places where you lost people on the defense, the people that are replacing them are going to be, I don't want to say just as good, but they're going to be able to fill some of the same. They're going to be able to fill the holes that the previous person left. I think that the one spot, and we'll get into these other positions later, the one spot that I think I have some questions about is Nakai Hill-Green, just because I've not seen him in an Alabama uniform. Obviously, replacing a guy like Jahad Campbell that's been so good off the ball, that's a spot that gives me a little bit of a question mark. But when I'm looking at the defensive backfield, obviously you lose Malachi Moore, but I think that how good Bray Hubbard played to end the season. Obviously, having a healthy Keon Sabb back and having the other freshmen and the other guys who played major minutes, I'm very happy with what I've seen. Obviously in the games that we've seen them, as well as the obviously everything coming out of practice, everything coming out of the different scrimmages. I'm very happy with what I've seen out of the defensive backfield. So I'm super happy with that defensive backfield. Like I said, this is the first position group that we're going to break down. I do plan to have some guys on, as I previously mentioned. I may try to see if I can have one of those on this week. If not, we will have one on next week. As always, thank you so much for everyone who supports the show. Like I said, if you are not subscribed to the channel already, if you could do so, I really would appreciate it. It absolutely does help me out. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Please comment, follow, subscribe over on Apple, Spotify, here on YouTube if you are not already as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.